If you remember from the last time we were in Matthew, we had just finished going through the Sermon on the Mount. So we'll be in chapter 8 this morning, but the Sermon on the Mount is Matthew 5 through 7. And you'll remember, if you know much about the Sermon on the Mount, Jesus goes through the Beatitudes, where he says, blessed are those who, actually very relevant to my prayer, blessed are those who mourn, for they shall be comforted. Blessed are the meek, for they shall inherit the earth. All of those, he talks about how we are to be the salt of the earth, we are to be the light of the world. Talks about how he came not to abolish the law or do away with the law, but to fulfill it. He goes through topics such as anger. He talks about divorce, loving your enemies. He gives the Lord's Prayer, teaches us how to pray, right? There's the famous bit in chapter 6 where he says, be anxious for nothing. He gives the golden rule. And then finally in chapter 7, you have the narrow gate. You have the man who builds his house on the rock, tree and its fruit, right? Very, very powerful and world-changing message. This world-changing message, it ends in chapter 7, verses 28 and 29 with this phrase, and when Jesus finished these sayings, the crowds were astonished at his teaching, and the reason why, for he was teaching them as one who had authority and not as their scribes. So it's like this message is world-changing if this guy is who he says he is. And it certainly seems like he is. Because they're thinking we've never heard someone preach with this kind of authority before. But the question that would pervade their minds and might pervade yours as well, is he? Put it this way, if I, in sort of a humorous way, if I went up to Elijah and said, oh, there's donuts in the fellowship hall, you should go get one. Now, he might think, okay, well, this is probably a trick, right? I'm going to go to the fellowship hall. There's going to be nothing. I'm going to say, haha, gotcha. But if I was holding a donut, then that would very likely change my message, and he could know that I'm speaking as one who has authority. There's a visible sign. And this is what miracles are. They're a visible donut in the hand, a visible sign that the good news I bring is real, and that my words have valid cause for you to alter your route. So contextually, it makes sense then that what follows this world-changing message that has supposed great authority, that what follows contextually is this authoritative message are authoritative signs. So beginning with today's message, we'll go through the miracles and the ministry of Jesus, or at least begin to, right? In Matthew 8 through 18. That's going to be this next series. Jesus' ministry in Galilee. And these miracles expressed his authority, as well as, therefore, the authority by proxy of the good news he brought. Now Matthew lists these miracles that we're going to read of in chapter 8, verses 1 through 17. Matthew lists them out of order. A lot of them are present in the other Gospels, and you think, okay, well, why group them this way instead of chronologically in order? Matthew lists them in groups pertaining to type in order to show Christ's authority over all types of things, right? So this Sunday has a special attention to physical sicknesses, specifically towards people who would be considered outcasts, right? But next Sunday he'll do a miracle about his authority that shows his authority over nature. Following that, his authority over demonic influence, his authority over sinfulness, his authority over a rough past, and so on. Right? And in the passage today, like I said specifically, Matthew begins with 3 instances of physical healing. He cleanses a leper in verses 1 through 4. He heals the paralyzed servant in verses 5 through 13. And took away the fever of Peter's mother-in-law and the sickness of many others in verses 14 through 17. So let's read Matthew chapter 8. When he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And behold, a leper came to him, and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. And Jesus stretched out his hand and touched him, saying, I will, be clean. And immediately his leprosy was cleansed. And Jesus said to him, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. When he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him as a commander of about 100 men. He said, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. And he said to him, I will come and heal him. But the centurion replied, Lord, I'm not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. And I say to one, go, and he goes, and to another, come, and he comes, and to my servant, do this, and he does it. When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, truly I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith. I tell you, many will come from east and west and recline at the table with Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness. In that place there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. And to the centurion Jesus said, go, let it be done for you as you have believed. And the servant was healed at that very moment. And when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she rose and began to serve him. That evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illnesses and bore our diseases. I actually had the privilege of going on a mission trip once to Brazil when I was 16. And when I went in that village in Brazil, I was told by a couple of my pastor friends, Nazarene pastors, they said they showed me a couple, or brought me to a couple that we all prayed for, who had leprosy. They told me that it was a couple who had leprosy. And when I read this story and prepared my message, I thought, surely that wasn't real. Surely, they didn't actually have leprosy. It was something else. I don't know why they would say that. Does leprosy even exist? And I Googled it, and a very reliable source, Wikipedia, said, when I asked the question, said, yes, leprosy, also known as Hansen's disease, still exists and is diagnosed globally every year. Said, while rare in the United States, about 100 cases are diagnosed annually, with a higher incidence in the southern states. Worldwide, around 200,000 new cases are reported annually, with a significant number occurring in Brazil, India, and Indonesia. So I was like, oh man, that was a true story. That really happened. So I'm someone who has come across this, and they are, even then, for the most part, isolated from everyone else in the village. And at this time, from as early as the book of Numbers onward, the tradition was if someone got near them, you had to let them know and yell unclean. I want you to notice also, great crowds already followed him in verse 1. Verse 1, when he came down from the mountain, great crowds followed him. And this is important to note off the get-go for a number of reasons, but I would say, first, note that it is the Lord's preaching that caused people to gather. They were interested in who he was in terms of him being the Messiah, and also his message. And after giving what would be then, and still now, is the most world-changing sermon ever, a crowd followed. And this is important to preface a series that is going to deal with a lot of miracles, because it's important that I point out he's not doing magic tricks in order to draw a crowd. The crowd is already there. There are people today who draw people by promising them miracles or healing or some great experience or move of the Spirit. But the Lord, on the other hand, told people, such as here in verse 4, see that you say nothing to anyone. Why? Because the miracles were to give credibility to the message and clarify his intent and authority. People are not saved by physical healing. They're saved by faith in his ability to perform the inward miracle, the inward healing. Just look, the people don't express faith after the miracle, they express faith prior, and even going so far as to declare him Lord. In verse 2, the leper came to him and knelt before him, saying, Lord, if you will, you can make me clean. The centurion came forward to him and said, Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly. He didn't perform miracles to get a crowd. He slowed the spread of the crowd by telling them not to tell anyone else, so that he wasn't killed before it was his time to die. Also so that the expectation that was popular at the time of him being some militaristic Messiah who would rid the land of Romans, or some royal Messiah by worldly standards of royalty, might be squelched. Finally, notice the specifics of the direction given. Right? He says, see that you say nothing to anyone, but go show yourself to the priest and offer the gift that offer the gift that Moses commanded for a proof to them. Some translations might say testimony rather than proof. But the statement itself is worth exploring because at first glance it may not be easily understood to us, and therefore there's a temptation for us to skim over it. First, there's the question, where does Moses command anyone to show oneself to a priest and offer a gift? What does that mean? In Leviticus 13 and 14, there's a list of different skin diseases and the remedy and how you're supposed to go to the priest about them. Leprosy at this time, even though I speak specific of leprosy, a lot of times it was just a general skin disease. They didn't know what to call it, and so they would call it leprosy. And so for various skin diseases, there's directions given in a lot of detail, I'll say, in Leviticus 13 to 14, for what one should do if cleansed from that skin disease, or if they're not cleansed from the skin disease. And so the rule basically is in ancient Israel, priests were not doctors, right? But they were responsible for declaring a person clean or unclean according to God's law. And once someone was healed of a skin disease, they had to be examined by a priest outside the camp. And they had to bring certain things, such as you'd have animal offerings, you have grain offerings, and these served as acts of atonement or thanksgiving, and would symbolize restored fellowship with God and with their community, I should say, because, like I said, they would be outcast from their community. And it wasn't a thing of shame to say unclean. It's like concern for the other person. You don't want to defile them, right? So that the purpose is not only health related, but ceremonial, distinguishing between what is clean and unclean. So that's important to know. So there's an emphasis in this action, right? Because it would symbolize not only their ability to be physically clean and commune with their community, but in regards to the priest, he would declare them also clean in terms of their ability to be in right standing with God. And so there's an element of holiness at play. So, there's an emphasis on God's holiness and the need for the purity of his people. Physical conditions had spiritual and communal implications in Israel, and that would reflect a broader need for spiritual cleanliness before God. So I say all that to say there's not much separation between physical and spiritual cleanliness in Israel. Right? If like we talked about in Haggai, if the hands of the people doing the work of God were defiled, the work itself was defiled. It's kind of similar idea here. But the leper similarly, and I should say nobly, is quite Christ-like in the way that they handle the matter, because Christ here points people to that spiritual. He uses this issue of physical cleanliness to point people then to spiritual cleanliness, and his desire to not only make them clean of their physical disease, but purify them spiritually and make them spiritually clean again. And the leper, similarly and nobly, isn't only worried about their ability to be reconciled to other people in their community, but to be reconciled to God. They're much more worried about being cast out from his presence than cast out from their community. And this is a theme that will continue in the centurion story. After this, when Jesus says, right, many will come from the east and west and recline at the table with Abraham and Isaac and Jacob in the kingdom of heaven, while the sons of the kingdom will be thrown into the outer darkness, right? Cast out into the outer darkness. So here's the question. Would we rather be cast out from our community or cast out from God? What's our priority? And his priority, nobly, is not only to be back in community with other people, but to be in communion with God. So the beautifully noble prayer of the leper is, as the old song says, "Create in me a clean heart, O God, and renew a right spirit within me. Cast me not away from your presence. Cast me not away from your presence. And take not your Holy Spirit from me. Restore unto me the joy of your salvation, and uphold me with your free spirit." Perhaps you're in a place that might call for a similar prayer this week. You find yourself in the thistles and thorns and dirt and need forgiveness and washing. Maybe you feel cast out by the people around you and unlovable and need the grace of our Lord to take you by the hand. When he had entered Capernaum, a centurion came forward to him, appealing to him, "Lord, my servant is lying paralyzed at home, suffering terribly." And he said to him, "I will come and heal him." But the centurion replied, "Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word, and my servant will be healed. For I too am a man under authority, with soldiers under me. For I say to one, 'Go,' and he goes, and to another, 'Come,' and he comes, and to my servant, 'Do this,' and he does it." When Jesus heard this, he marveled and said to those who followed him, "Truly, I tell you, with no one in Israel have I found such faith." Look at verse 7. He said to him, "I will come and heal him." That's what my ESV says. D.A. Carson points out, however, that he thinks this might be a mistranslation. And I think he's on to something. Jesus makes no similar declarations elsewhere. He makes the case that it ought to be translated, Carson does, "Shall I come and heal him?" in the form of a question like that. And why this makes sense contextually is because Jesus is asking if he, a Jew, should come into the home of a Gentile, because doing so would risk that ritual impurity. And so it makes a lot of sense with the story that came before as well. And it fits also with the, like I said, it fits with the story of the leper. When he asks this question, he draws out the man's extraordinary belief that Jesus can heal from a distance. He says, no need. Like I'm someone who has authority. I've got 100 men under my authority. Like, I say to someone, do it, and they do it. I believe you can do the same. And what Jesus replies in verses 6 and 7, right? She says, Lord, my servant is paralyzed at home, suffering terrible. And he says to him, shall I come and heal him? And the centurion replies, Lord, I am not worthy to have you come under my roof, but only say the word and my servant will be healed. And Jesus later on says this very beautiful sentiment to him, but he says it kind of to others, really, where he says to them, to the Jewish audience, I tell you, no one in Israel have I found such faith. So like no other Jew have I come across displays this faith, and yet this Gentile does. So many Israelites, he says, many will come from east and west and recline at a table with Abraham and Isaac in the kingdom of heaven. While the sons of the kingdom, he says, many Jews will be thrown into the outer darkness, in that place where there will be weeping and gnashing of teeth. So he says, this faith is showed not by a Jew here, but a Gentile. And he even invokes the name of the patriarchs, Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. I was reading my commentary on this. My commentary is plural on this, right? Because I think I have more material on Matthew than anything else. And each of these commentaries pointed out the way that this would have likely enraged the Jewish crowd there and angered them. That's what they pointed out. And it makes sense, right? Jesus claimed first that this foreign officer of the hated, occupying Roman forces has greater faith than anyone in Israel. And two, that many will come from the ends of the earth to partake in the heavenly banquet of all God's redeemed people, while many Israelites will be excluded. Right? So it makes sense that my commentaries would say that it would have enraged the Jewish people present in Capernaum that Jesus was talking to. But my thinking is, yeah, probably. But imagine how it made the centurion feel. He stood there, a Roman, a Gentile, a man of power, yet trembling under the weight of grace. He'd not come in pride. He came in desperation and reverence, to the point where he called this Jewish rabbi Lord. And not out of flattery, but with soul-aching knowledge that his authority, his command, right, all 100 of his regiment, none of it could save his servant, but Jesus could. And then, truly I tell you, I have not found anyone in Israel with such great faith. Can you imagine how this felt for him? He who had not grown up with the law, the prophets, the promises of Abraham, yet there he stood, and the Son of God marveled at his faith. Not a scribe, not a priest, a Gentile. And as others heard of weeping and gnashing, of the kingdom's gate slamming shut, like the doors of the ark, this man hears something different. That faith, not birthright, unlocks the door. So I do wonder how he must have felt. I wonder about him, and I think of him standing there, stunned, unworthy, and yet embraced, and caught where I often find myself caught when I enter the pulpit, between fear and unspeakable joy, because Jesus Christ had looked into his soul and found something pleasing. Oh, to have Christ marvel at not our strength, but our surrender. And when Jesus entered Peter's house, he saw his mother-in-law lying sick with a fever. He touched her hand, and the fever left her, and she rose and began to serve him. That evening they brought to him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick. This was to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. He took our illnesses and he bore our diseases. Now, I'll talk more about demons in the week after next, and so I'll save my thoughts for there. But there is a lot to note here. First, women were not held in high esteem during this time. I mean, that's a given, right? But also, even something as simple as a fever at this time, you don't really know what it is right off the get-go, right? I mean, like it's guesswork. And so touching anyone with a fever would actually be uncommon, believe it or not, and especially someone related to you. Right, again, for all they knew, it could be a more serious, the start of something more serious, right? I can tell you the Pharisees probably wouldn't have even visited her. They certainly wouldn't have gone in the home. And even if they did, they would have likely only seen prejudice where Jesus saw a person, with her being a woman. And notice the structure of this sort of pericope also, right? Where Jesus walks into this very private place, right? A home, and a specific person is mentioned, and then you zoom out to they brought him many who were oppressed by demons, and he cast out the spirits. I mean, it's sort of a very rapid crescendo into that, right? So a very personal moment, and then they bring him everyone who's oppressed, and he cast out the spirits with a word and healed all who were sick, to fulfill what was spoken by the prophet Isaiah. Right? So I think this is intentional by Matthew. Because to me it shows that his healing power, and when I talk about healing power, as we discussed in terms of the leper, specifically, when we talk about God's healing power, it's both internal and external. And his healing power inwardly and outwardly is simultaneously personal and widespread. So I think this text does really, really well to show it. And it's beautiful because sometimes, like for instance, when we think of the devil as or Satan as the antithesis of God, we sort of make him a villain, like a supervillain, where he's God's equal, when really he's not God's equal by any means. He's just evil, right? He's just the literally and personifying wise, he is evil, right? But sometimes, like sometimes we treat him as if his power also is as much personal as it is widespread, and that's not the case, right? Satan, you could think of, has bigger fish to fry. Where I've come across, I was listening to this lady talk I guess last week, and she was talking about how she struggled with gluttony, and she was driving by Krispy Kreme, and the light was on, at Krispy Kreme. She was like, the devil was just really after me. The devil, personally, he was just after me. And it's like, well, probably not the devil, right? A demon, sure, but probably not. He's probably not I gotta, get Susie Lou with her donut. It's like he has bigger fish to fry, right? He's not as personal as he is widespread, and his power, whatever power that is, right? But what's so magnificent, you could say, about our Lord is that his healing power, inwardly and outwardly, is just as personal as it is widespread. It's simultaneously personal and widespread. And it's amazing, right? Because you have someone who not only atones for the sins of the whole world, but also draws us to him in ways that are personal to us. He loves all of us as if there was only one of us. To conclude, I want to give some answer to how we're supposed to respond to that. Because that's what's on display in this passage, really. God's, yes, healing power over physical diseases, but one, it's something he displays very personally with each of these individuals. Something that is happening on a personal level, but simultaneously widespread in regards to his inward healing of them and their external, the miracle of their external healing. It's the love of God on people, even the outcasts, on full display. Does that make sense? So each of these cases is an outcast, right? Be it the leper, the Gentile, Roman, or the woman at this time. So that's what's on full display. And so I want to give some answers. They responded rightly. And so it provides a model for us as to how we're to respond to that, because they had to actually respond to that in real time. All right. So first I would say, examine your faith. Examine your faith. Is it like the centurions? Right? Do you trust in God's word even when you don't see the immediate results? Right? The centurion's servant was home. He wasn't present, but he believed in God's power even over what he couldn't see. So do you trust in God's word even when you don't see immediate results? If you ask him for healing or remedy in your life, or some sort of, of some sort of or another, whatever that healing or remedy might be, and he says wait, or he says no without making, clear the good that will come from it, will you trust him? Do you trust in his hand in things you have no hand in yourself? Do you trust his presence in places where you are not present? And I ask that because only when you answer yes to that does the rest of this matter, right? But if yes, then I would say approach Jesus like these people, humbly and in confident faith, even when you feel unclean or unlovable or beyond saving, right? Or like an outcast. And then I would say, remember that obedience matters after the miracle, right? It's not, obedience isn't what you do to get Jesus to do miracles or to do what you want. Obedience is what you do in response to his miracles. Like Peter's mother-in-law, who got up and immediately started to serve the Lord. See to it that you do the same. Our benediction this morning